Hello and welcome. My name is Nate from Video Games Recon, and this will be the second in this pilot series of videos with the working title Talking Points. These videos are basically my thoughts on all sorts of random topics based within gaming and the industry. So basically an editorial opinion piece, or some might even call it a rant. Some might call it a lot worse should they happen to disagree, but that's by the by. Anyway, talking points are at best a succinct editorial from a well-informed individual, and at worst a delusioned lunatic's rant. Heck, who am I kidding? The latter seems more apt. But either way, all are things that rat around my pretty little head when people start talking about what they had for dinner, or what they dreamt last night, or some such bullshit. Ain't nobody got time for that. Anywho, it's basically me trying to air a frustration, to think outside of the box and unpack an issue and deliver my talking point out into the ether for you to think about for yourself. As usual, please keep in mind this is just my humble opinion and not gospel, as there's no such thing as a definitive opinion. Just the gibbering thoughts of a crazed man, literally talking to himself, and then posting it on the internet for you all to see and form your own opinions on. Put simply, discussing some talking points. Man, I'm gonna have to figure a more to the point introduction for future videos. Anywho, speaking of gibbering, and without any further ado, let's quit the gibber and the jabber and do it to it. The talking point we're going to discuss in this video are the two words that make us all feel a little dirty inside. Early access. I could start with the video parodying early access by stripping this video of content in a wink wink, nod nod sort of way, but that's already been done. Instead, I'll ask the question, is early access an innovation to help bankroll indie projects that may have otherwise struggled for funding, or an excuse for an overhyped, unaccountable cash grab from seemingly indifferent, risk-averse developers? Well, although early access is predominantly a PC issue, it is something that has or will also start to worm its way into other gaming formats. Let's take this generation's very consoles themselves as an example of this. As when you think about it, even the PS4 and Xbox were released in a sort of early access or beta phase, missing many promised and standard features that were even available on the previous generation of console, which to be fair might not have been such an issue if rectified in the first couple of months or even the first year, instead of still being an issue in many respects to this very day. Sure, I know some apps and whatnot may need rewriting with changing to the x86 architecture, but this excuse is only going to go so far for so long, from a service that we all have to pay for, be either Sony or Microsoft, excluding the Wii U to an extent. Well, all I can say to that is, welcome to 2015, where paying more for less is the norm. And so, this issue combined with broken games at launch and stability patch after stability patch is not only a reflection of the early access model, but the realisation that early access isn't a PC only issue, and isn't only a problem for the future. It's here now and is not only becoming the norm, but a growing trend in some capacity on all platforms, and as such needs to be taken seriously by both us and moderated by the respective networks who have a responsibility to their customers. One of the only companies not having to deal with problems of this ilk, for the most part, is ironically Nintendo, as with being stuck so far in the past that they're only just discovering DLC, are still at the point in history where these supposed advancements were actually good, innovative and full of promise. Thus Nintendo not having to deal with many of the potential minefields like early access, free to play, pay to win, microtransactions, day one DLC and so on. This is the exact reason why, at least critically, Nintendo is perceived as killing it at the moment, at least with their first party games anyway. I think the reason for this is that people yearn for those good old days when things like DLC were all about added value as opposed to added costs. Whether Nintendo will catch up to the competition in this regard and adopt these potential clusterfucks disguised as innovation or not, who knows? But it just shows how something that should have been a negative for Nintendo has been turned around into a positive due to the constant exploitation of things like early access. So, Speaking of these clusterfucks, let's go over some of the myriad of potential issues facing early access. First off, the lack of real consequences and accountability for companies lacking good business ethics and the potential failure or abandonment of a project, i.e. things like failing to be properly policed, moderated or reprimanded in any way, shape or form by digital distributors like Steam, who refuse to refund you even if a game you were promised by the developer doesn't get finished, or even if it does, is a broken substandard pile of putrefied vomit not worthy of your time, let alone your money. Next, developers potentially struggling to keep themselves and their customers engaged with the project they're working on up to release, as a large and possibly majority proportion of their player base has already paid for their game, so sales will inevitably plateau and slow down dramatically, thus struggling to entice gamers back or recreate the initial hype come the actual full release, as a large proportion will have most likely moved on to other games or new things to be hyped for, mainly due to the lack of content and features being unable to keep their audience engaged during the development process, as what little there is of the game that's still captivating has been played so much due to craving that experience you've been wanting so much that the gamer gets oversaturated and burnt out, which means some gamers may never return to even play the game at full release, and instead move on to pastures greener, thus running the increasing risk that a developer may get disenfranchised with the development process and the diminishing community that they never truly finish the project, instead abandoning it and moving over to the next project, which in the long run will only hurt the gaming industry as a whole and the reputation of said companies. And finally, the growing risk that a large proportion of AAA game publishers and developers will start to jump on this bandwagon, akin to what is now the norm in terms of pre-orders, DLC and day one patches for broken games. For example, Fallout New Vegas, Assassin's Creed Unity, Battlefield 4 and the list goes on. If you step back and think about it, these broken games that are slowly getting fixed via patches are essentially in a state of early access, or at the very least a paid for beta test, which doesn't bode well for AAA games in general that are already going through difficult times. Now, with all that said, there's no point in demonising developers and maybe even early access itself, particularly indie developers who would have never been able to get funding from an investor for some of the unique, innovative and original games, being near impossible to bring to market without releasing it in early access or via crowdsourced funding, as early access, aside from the money, offers a large supply of free game testers. Without these less traditional funding options, many a good game wouldn't or couldn't exist, as deemed too risky by investors. So what I'm trying to say here is, as long as the company in question does right by its customers, early access can be a good thing for both consumers and developers alike, and combined with self-publishing and crowdsourced funding has helped to create a golden age for indie games. Early access can also be a good thing to encourage a sense of community around a project, making the consumer feel like they've been part of the development process and have influenced the developers to create features they may not have otherwise done, which, if not just lip service by a game developer, for the most part can only be a good thing. Let's discuss potential solutions for digital distributors should they ever wish to hold unscrupulous companies accountable. One idea is a suspension or temporary blacklist from digital storefronts for a set amount of time, forcing them, if they wish to make another game, to develop it without the banner of early access, and forcing them to take their time, say a year or two, in which they must provide evidence of actually developing the game during this period, before their suspension is lifted and they can publish said game. Even though there are many developers out there doing good by their supporters and completing the games up to and even beyond the standards they set themselves, it makes you think, how do the developers keep themselves motivated to finish the game and try and live up to the hype when the buzz around their game has long since moved on? On top of which, potentially running the risk that the more casual gamer will not play the game in a state that the developer intended it to be played as, and only a hardcore minority of fans will truly get to see the game's potential unleashed, resulting in a meh, it was okay, average at best reaction from a less patient or educated audience, limiting the general consumer's stock in a developer who aren't informed on the game, potentially hurting any future titles doing more bad than good for a company in the long term. And that's even presuming that the game was good and that they did right by their fans. What, if anything, can be done to make things better? Well, let me start off by throwing a question out there. Should game reviewers review the game as is now, adopting the mantra, is it worth buying or playing for what it is now? Not, does the game have merit or potential if it becomes a complete experience? Instead, purely as consumer advice, should we ask, is it worth parting with your hard-earned money now, or should you wait and buy it later? Also, a lot of game developers and fanboys can use terms like early access and alpha or beta gameplay as a shield to hide behind so as to dismiss critique, which to a degree is understandable if the game's not finished, as websites and YouTubers will gladly create clickbait just to hop on board the hate train as it gets hits and views. But with that, if you're going to charge for something, then there's no bones about it. You are selling a product, and at the very least, people should be able to offer consumer advice if it's in the public interest, without having the get out of free jail card of early access waved in their face as an exemption. For me, if you're buying into an idea rather than a game, then something like a crowdsourcing format alone would be a much better fit. And if you want to let them play it early, lock it in so that only people who are huge fans of your concept, who will go out of their way to find it on Kickstarter or Patreon to support it, get to play it early. This is of course presuming that they're not double dipping, both releasing it as early access and crowdsource funding. Not that this is always and inherently a bad thing. And don't even get me started on the holy trinity of douchebaggery in being backed by a publisher, crowdsource funding and early access. Just saying all that makes me vomit a little in my mouth. And shit, if they're really unscrupulous and born from devil spawn, they'll probably throw in day one DLC and microtransactions to boot. Now I really feel ill. I think I'd best lie down for a minute. Another thing that we can do is come to terms with the fact that we, the consumer, can often be part of the problem. Either by naivety, not doing our research first, or by being sucked in by their marketing spiel and boarding that train of hype. And yes, we've all been guilty of just that at some point or other, and there's nothing wrong with that, it's only human. But that brings us to what we can do about it. Well, put simply, we can stop buying games before they're ready. Or if you want to support something that's more of a concept than a game, then encourage the creators to set up a Kickstarter campaign. As although there's still pitfalls with this, most people who fund crowdsource projects simply are fans that want to support something, an idea, and not necessarily want anything in return until it's finished. Also, something to note under Kickstarter's current terms of service, the creator is entering into a contract with their backers and not with Kickstarter itself, agreeing to complete said project and fulfilling all its rewards, meaning that theoretically the backers could sort legal action against the creators/developers of a project, ironically perhaps even itself funded by a Kickstarter campaign. Put simply, what you can do as a consumer is not to buy straight off the bat when something becomes available. Watch some Let's Plays, check out your favourite reviewers on YouTube or on a gaming website who you trust that aren't in bed with any developers financially speaking. And ask yourself, do I need to support this right now? And do I need this game now, or can I wait till it's at very least going to give a genuine vertical slice of the gaming experience? A taste of what's to come, and a slice of pie that's actually fun and won't take 2 years plus to cut the pie up and serve the complete feature set and gaming experience you were promised many moons ago. FYI, I think I'm done with the food analogies, you'll be glad to know. If you want to support a project now and there isn't a crowdsource option, then you could always buy it and play it later. Although the game developer will fail to learn that early access isn't working for you if you do so, presuming that it's not. Or if you really want to send a message to developers that this isn't the droid you're looking for, then vote with your wallet, as capitalism for the consumer is a democracy. And if we show the gaming industry with our inaction, perhaps the powers that be will start to get the message that unless they're going to do this properly and are accountable for their actions, or lack thereof, this isn't going to be the financial model that will part us from our cash. So, that just leaves me with a question. What are your thoughts on early access, both good and bad? And of course, my usual marketing spiel, in that if you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, share and subscribe for more BS of a similar nature. Thank you and goodbye.